Hello, everybody. This is Ralph Martin, the founder of rjqualityconsulting.com. And in this video, I want to talk about the AS9100 calibration requirements. Right now, I'm on my blog post about AS9100 calibration requirements. And if you're watching this video on YouTube and you want to get all of the information, I have detailed out all of the AS9100 calibration requirements in this blog article. Go ahead and click on the link within the description of the YouTube video and you can read this blog article. Or you could also be watching this video on the blog article. In that case, I recommend reading everything on this page if you're interested in AS9100 calibration requirements. But in this video, what I'd like to do, and I do this in all of my videos, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, go ahead and click on the subscribe button. I do offer a lot of value when it comes to quality management standards such as AS9100, ISO 17025, ISO 9001, and quality management in general. I am a certified external auditor and also a quality consultant that offers value in that I can see both sides of the audit. I have been the auditee and the auditor, and I do know what external auditors look for. So if you need any help or assistance in anything, feel free to book a free 45-minute consultation with me. Down below this video on my blog page, you can see where you can do that. And you can also read my About Me page and find out who the heck I am and why does that matter. But anyway, one of the things I do is I like to go right to the source when it comes to standards and the requirements of things like ISO 9001, AS9100, or ISO 17025. I always like to go right to the source when it comes to the requirements in the standard to see what the actual standard says. And then I like to talk about what a auditor would be looking for as far as documentation so that you can do well in a external audit, whether you are seeking AS9100 certification or you are already certified and you're wanting to improve your calibration requirements or your calibration area, and maybe even in preparation for a future recertification audit or surveillance audit from your registrar. But without further ado, what I'd like to do is go right to the standard. So calibration is discussed in the AS9100 standard, specifically in section 7.1.5.2, measurement traceability. So the thing about calibration is that term can be confusing to people who are not used to it. But basically, if you understand the purpose behind measurement traceability, then you understand calibration and the calibration requirements that the standard is asking your organization to adhere to. So basically, for the requirements calibration under AS9100, what it refers to is really any piece of equipment that gives you a result is considered a that would have to meet the requirements of calibration. So when measurement traceability is a requirement, and what that means is if you have a piece of equipment that gives you a measurement result, that the rules behind calibration apply. So, or the organization is considered to be an essential part of providing confidence in the validity of a measurement result, measuring equipment shall be calibrated or verified, or both, at specific intervals or prior to use against measurement standards traceable to international or national measurement standards. So what does that mean? So what that means is that you have a piece of measuring equipment, whether that be a thermometer, whether it be a multimeter, whether it be gauge, whether it be calipers, whatever the device is that produces a result, can be calibrated by, say, an external calibration provider, and the traceability would be to the SI units through NIST through a calibration certificate. That would be the documentation that would prove that you're meeting these measurement traceability requirements in the case of having an outside vendor do the calibration for you. The piece of paper or the document that is proving that, or is the objective evidence from an auditor's point of view, would be the documentation required to ensure measurement traceability is intact. If, on the other hand, you are not hiring a outside vendor to do your calibration, then what you need to do is verify against some sort of standard. And what that means is either a reference standard that you're using as a source of traceability, and you're comparing that device to a standard reference material. For an example of that would be a standard reference weight for a balance, right? You can either hire a calibration vendor to come out and calibrate your balance, which is typically something that is done once a year. And we'll get back to this part. But there's another way that you can verify your balance. You could use weights, reference weights, to check your reference weights to see if the measurement is correct. Like if you have a 1 gram weight, you want to make sure that it weighs 1 gram plus or minus whatever the measurement uncertainty is of those of that particular measurement, which is typically on that could be found on the certificate of analysis for the reference weights that you're using to do the verification check. So that would be an example of getting it calibrated by an outside vendor or verified using a traceable standard. The traceable standard in the case of the balance is the reference weight, and the proof of traceability is in the certificate of analysis of the reference weight itself. That is pointing to the SI units through NIST. So when it comes to measurement traceability, and keep in mind, I am an ISO 17025 auditor, and ISO 17025 is the standard for calibration. It is the go-to standard. So in ISO 17025, measurement traceability requirements are stated as such. And if you don't understand this statement, don't worry about it. But there shall be no unbroken chain of traceability to the SI units through NIST. That is what the requirements are for traceability. That documentation that proves that is either going to be a calibration certificate from a calibration vendor, or it's going to be a certificate of analysis for the reference standard that you're doing your verification check against. So that would be meeting section 7152A. These measurement pieces of equipment need to be calibrated or verified, or both, at specific intervals, and specific intervals meaning that it shall be identified by the user. So if there's no stated, like for example, you could say, well, we want to calibrate it daily. But if you don't use it daily, you might just say that you calibrate it prior to use. That way, if you use the device 3 times a week, you calibrate it or verify it prior to it being used every time you use it. And against some sort of measurement standard traceable to the international or national measurement standards. And I gave you the example of what you would do with a balance, for example. But when no such standards exist, the basis used for calibration or verification shall be retained as documented information. So you want to make sure whatever you do, whether it is hiring a calibration company or verifying it using a measurement traceable standard, you want to make sure that these are documented. And then you want to make sure in the documentation that you are identified in order to determine the status. And what this means essentially is the user of the equipment needs to know that that piece of equipment has indeed been calibrated or verified and is okay to use. That's what 7152 is B is referring to. It needs to be identified in order to determine the status. So that piece of equipment, the person using it needs to know, has it been calibrated? Is it okay to use? And what is the next due date? If it's prior to use, then it needs to be documented that next time you use it needs to be checked or calibrated. Or a due date of an actual date that is the next calibration due date. So the expectation of documentation or objective evidence would be that data documented on when it was calibrated or checked, and also when it is due for its next calibration. And then you want to make sure that there are safeguards from any damage to any of these pieces of equipment that would invalidate the status of calibration and subsequent measurement results. That's what 7152C. And what that means is, for example, in the case of a balance, you want to make sure that the balance isn't placed in an area where it could get bumped or it can fall off the lab bench or something like that, which would invalidate its results. If that did happen, then what you would have to do is take it out of operation until you verify it that it has been calibrated again. In the case of a balance, you would check your reference weights to make sure the reference weights give you the right weight before putting it back into use. That's what 7152C means. And then it goes on to say the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain a process for the recall of monitoring and measurement equipment requiring calibration or verification. So what does that mean? What this means is that if something happened within the calibration process where it was indeed out of calibration or it failed the verification check, you need to recall that device, put it out of use, but also go back and check to make sure that there wasn't past results generated as a result of whatever caused it to not function. You want to go back and check your results if indeed, how long has it been out of service? Was there data generated while it was out of service? And you have to go back and verify that. That's what that means. And also, the next item here is the organization shall maintain a register of the monitoring and measurement equipment. The register shall include the equipment type. Is it a balance? Is it a thermometer? Is it a gauge? Is it whatever the piece of equipment is? And the unique identification number, balance number 1, gauge block number 6542, something that identifies it as a unique device. Then where it's located and the calibration or verification method. In other words, was it calibrated by an outside vendor? Was it verified against a traceable reference standard? How often, the frequency, and the acceptance criteria. All that should be on some sort of spreadsheet or log, and that would be the expectation. And an auditor is going to want to see that log. And if you're missing any of these items that are on this requirement, you will get a non-conformance. That would be the expectation. And then it has a note, monitoring and measurement equipment can include, but are not limited to, test hardware, test software, automated test equipment, and plotters used to produce verification data and this also includes personally owned and customer supplied equipment used to provide evidence of a product or service conformity. So if anything that you're using that gives evidence of something that tells you that your process is good, not good, that the numbers match whatever the criteria is or the specifications, that piece of equipment needs to be in this register. So that is going to be an auditable document that the auditor is going to want to see. If you don't have one of these logs, you will get a non-conformance. And rightly so, you should know that you need one because why? Because section 7.1.5.2 says so. And that is where the calibration requirements of AS9100 reside. And also you want to keep in mind that the last note here, calibration or verification of monitoring and measurement equipment shall be carried out under suitable environmental conditions. So what that means is that if a calibration is being performed and it's defined that that calibration needs to be performed with a temperature range of 20 to 30 degrees centigrade, but it's 35 degrees centigrade in the area that you're performing the calibration, that would not be good. And if you have that recorded somewhere as 35 degrees and the auditor notices that the range should be 20 to 30 degrees, you are susceptible to a non-conformance in that area. So I just wanted to make sure that, these are the calibration requirements for AS9100. When you go in and you do a F-find on the word calibration in the standard, this is what comes up. These are the requirements for AS9100 calibration requirements. And I just kind of went over those, and, the documentation expectations would be for a device that's calibrated, the auditor is going to want to see a calibration certificate if it was performed by a calibration vendor. Calibration vendor, you are paying them to do a calibration service, and part of that is to provide a calibration certificate for the device they are calibrating. A piece of paper or a purchasing document is not, I quote, and I will repeat, a vendor purchase order is not a calibration certificate. I don't know how many nonconformities I've given because somebody's shown me as a calibration certificate a purchase order. That is not a calibration certificate. So did I make myself clear? Calibration certificate will have things on it that shows as found. It was out of calibration when we found it. We are in calibration now. The calibration results are, the measurement uncertainty of the calibrations are listed in table 1, and all of that is on a calibration certificate with the company's name and preferably an ISO 17025 logo of some sort, being a calibration standard that the vendor, you really should use ISO 17025 accredited companies to do your calibration. Some auditors, some AS9100 auditors are very picky about that, and oftentimes will even give you a non-conformance if they're not, because they'll say that they are not competent accreditation provider or competent calibration providers, because that requirement's in ISO 17025. So that being said, the other document that would be necessary in the world of calibration for AS9100 calibration requirements would be this calibration register or log. You need to have one of those, and it needs to have all these items in this bold italicized sentence here. That would be the other thing. If you are not doing calibration performed by a vendor, then the documentation that the auditor would need to see would be a certificate of analysis for the reference standard that you verified it against. So those would be the documents. And in addition to that, you want to make sure that calibration equipment is labeled. So that, and the reason for labeled, coded, or otherwise identified to allow the user of the equipment to know that it has been calibrated and it's okay to use. whether that be a sticker on the piece of equipment or whether that be a logbook underneath the item, as long as the person using it is trained to look at the log before they use the piece of equipment. The idea here is that it is labeled, coded, or otherwise documented to allow the user of the equipment to know its calibration status and when it's due for calibration next. That is the requirement. So I think I've covered all the necessary requirements that an auditor would look at in your calibration program and what would make a good, sound calibration program for your AS9100 calibration requirements. If you have any questions or anything like that, and you would like to leave a comment below this blog post, feel free to do so. I monitor my blog posts and I do answer questions immediately or within 24 hours. So feel free to leave a comment on my blog. And also, if you would like to book a free 45-minute consultation with me about anything quality management related, feel free to do so. It's free, and I oftentimes can help you in getting ready for your next audit. So in that case, this is Ralph Martin signing off. You make it a great day.